Many years ago, I became enamored with a very young cable network. You thought I was going to say something else, I know. That's part of the reason I paused there. I just wanted to go ahead and let you do that. This particular fledgling network drew my attention. It hooked me from the beginning. The first time I ever saw it, I started going to that network and watching the television shows that they would put there because they were not like others. Well, they were similar, but not quite like any of the others I had ever seen. It was the Food Network. You thought it was going to be something spiritual, right? Well, it is. In those early years, those shows hooked me. Those chefs who were plying their trade, they were showing me, no one else, just me, how to make these wonderful, magnificent dishes. And they were happy doing it. And they were dressed in their whites or whatever it was that they were wearing. And they were talking and describing, and the cameras would go so that I could see what was happening. And I loved it. I absolutely loved watching those shows. I'll tell you a secret. I would watch them, and I would think, this is how it is in those fine restaurant kitchens. I bet I could learn to be a chef. After all, I serve food every week. I could see myself there. I had this fantasy of what that would be like, and even to have a television show like what they had, because they had people there with them, and they would talk to me, and they would talk to them, and then they would serve them the food, and I could smell it. And there were times I could almost taste it. And I loved it so much that I bought their dish towels. And I have to tell you, at that time, it wasn't quite built up like it is now, but had one of them come to my hometown, I would have gone to see them. And I would have thoroughly enjoyed it. And if they were close enough, I would have gone to a taping of one of their shows. I actually thought about it. Maybe I can go in a year. It's what it's like, when people make it and it's presented to you in such a way and you go, I can make it too, when I want to go see them because they inspire me in some way. I suspect that that's similar to what may have been playing both in the minds of Jesus' hometown folks and in Jesus' mind perhaps as he goes home to visit. In the previous chapters in Mark, before we read today's, much of what he's been doing is being approached by people who have come to ask him to do things for him, mostly healing. And he's done it. And oh, what success he has had. And his reputation goes ahead of him to his hometown. And the people are going, oh, here he is. It's the big guy. He's made it big. He's on the Food Network. He's coming home. And they go to see. I loved those television shows. I loved them so much. And then after a few years, I was in a bookstore. And there on the book sale table was a book, and I reached down and picked it up, and it was a book by the name of Nasty Bits, and it was written by Anthony Bourdain. And it was a series of essays on food and other things. And I'd seen Anthony on TV a couple of times, but I didn't like him because he didn't fit my mold of how he should be. And then I got his book, Kitchen Confidential. You've read it, haven't you? I heard the... And I realized as I read it, I heard how all of the professional chefs loved it. And there, as I read it, I came to encounter not my image of how a chef should be, and even how it was presented to me, but the nitty-gritty of what daily life in those fine restaurant kitchens was like. And I have to tell you, it wasn't pretty. Our expectations get us into trouble all the time. Everywhere we look, probably every day of our lives, we will have some expectation we have challenged. And some of those are small. And some of them are really nice challenges. That person who, because of the way they acted when we saw them walking across the parking lot, turned out to be really very nice. But sometimes our expectations of reality don't fit with how it really is. And those challenges can become very, very painful and very disorienting. That happens in our lives of faith, too. One of the things that I found that I was looking for with these chefs that I wanted to watch on television was not only were they inspiring, but they were incredibly entertaining. And sometimes that becomes our expectation in our spiritual lives as well. We show up at church because maybe it's going to be entertaining this week. It'll be good music, or somehow they'll say something that will entertain us. But we're somehow, when we show up, confronted with something that may be much more challenging and deeper, and we go away going, I'm not sure I like that. Or perhaps there are other expectations that we have after our encounters with Jesus or with God, and we come forward looking for them to be certain ways, or we think that when we walk out these doors and we live God's love in the world, that all the world is going to sing and hold hands. Admit it. You thought that once, didn't you? I did. But being confronted by the reality of those kinds of things in our lives invites us not simply to turn away from our faith, but to move deeper within it. Not to shun or be shunned, but to claim and move beyond. You and I often, I think, adopt this image that somehow it's an individual kind of thing, this act or life of faith, that it's something that I do myself, and therefore if I see it in a certain way, that's how faith should be. That's how I should live out my spiritual life. And then reality hits us in the face, and we realize that it can't be that way. It's disorienting. It's very disconcerting. Or perhaps we carry within us the image that to be a faithful person means that I have to do it. I am the only one who can make this happen. But the reality is, I can't do it. I can't do it. But we can. You see, our lives of faith are not simply about one person trying to do what I think needs to be done, but what we do to share the love of God in the world. It's not about necessarily how slick or fancy or pretty it is. It's about the dirty, gritty work of loving people who often don't want to be loved, and who, if they do, will often push us away from doing it. I think it's really interesting that in this story this morning that Mark tells us, he tells us that Jesus was very disappointed. His expectations weren't met either. And certainly the hometown folks with whom he used to play baseball and hang out in the park, they didn't like what he was doing or saying either. And that because of all of this going on, Jesus wasn't able to do anything except heal a few people. Heal a few people? So what did he do? He called the 12 together and he said, from now on, you're going out 2 by 2. This is not something you're going to bear by yourself. And when you disappoint people, you disappoint people. It's going to happen. Don't worry about it. Move on. Don't be seduced by the slick TV shows. Those chefs are good chefs. They have wonderful reputations. They make wonderful food, but that's not the reality. Read about the nasty stuff, the gritty stuff, the dirty stuff, the people getting their hands dirty in the world. Not because it looks good, not because it's wonderful, but because it's what we're called to do because we love God and we love other people. And don't, whatever you do, let it take you away from your task. Regardless of how disappointing or hurtful or frustrating it may be at times. Because the love of God is big enough and strong enough to help us move through that and go where we need to.